From the beginning of the Monster Hunter franchise, there has been one looming question. What is the best weapon? This has changed throughout the series, but there are a few that have stood steadfast. In this video, I'm going to be ranking every single weapon from worst to best. Just because I don't think it's a very good weapon, it doesn't mean it cannot clear all the content. Every single monster can be killed with every single weapon, but you'll understand this a bit more when I explain my criteria. Lastly, before we get into it, I have a newborn baby sitting right behind me, so if you hear any sneezes or coughs or laughs, that is due to, like I said, a little newborn sitting there. Normally I would edit out any background noise or sound, but because it's so cute, I'm going to leave it in there, so be sure to leave a comment anytime you hear my little baby sneeze, laugh, cough, or make any other noises. There are quite a few categories I'll be taking into account when ranking all these weapons, but the most important ones that I see are, first off, how easy is it to understand and play, how fun is it to play, how much damage it deals, and then what is the skill cap and how high can you take those weapons. First on the list, and coming in at number 14, is the Lance. That's it, the plain old Lance. This is really good for group play. It's super beefy, and you can make extremely tanky builds around this. Just because it's last doesn't mean it can't dish out damage. I have seen many people absolutely obliterate things. I have seen many people use this thing to great success and obliterate every monster in front of them. I don't find it super fun to play. It's kind of slow, it's kind of clunky, but it has tons of counter moves, it has tons of defense, and if that's your playstyle, this is the weapon for you. Sliding into the 13th spot is going to be one that I think is probably more controversial. That is the Switch Axe. One of the criteria that I rank these weapons on is ease of use and noob friendliness, and this one is kind of hard to understand. It's the one weapon that throughout the series has been a little confusing to me to understand. Now that doesn't mean it's good, it also just means I'm dumb when it comes to this weapon. But it has some really nutty combos. It's really easy to switch in and out of its different forms. It can pump out some massive elemental damage, but with all that being said, it is just a little hard to understand and can be very difficult to master. But if you take the time to learn it and master it, it can be one of the best weapons in the game. I did not clarify this before, but this weapon and every one that came before on the list, I would classify as a C tier. Now, if you know anything about schooling, C is passing, so this is great. Doesn't mean it's a bad weapon, just means it's lower on the list for me. So rounding out the list of the C tier weapons at number 12 is the Gun Lance. The Gun Lance is essentially the lance with more offense. It's got guns. It's got a big gun. It's got a gun that go boom boom. Once again, this is a fantastic weapon for group play. I think it gives you a bit more viability in doing damage by yourself. I've seen some people just go wild with this thing, just like the Lance before it. It has lots of counter moves, it has lots of ways to dish out huge damage, but the big draw for this weapon is, of course, the Lance with a gigantic gun in it. The Gun Lance actually has one of my favorite focus mode attacks, and I love the way it looks, I love the animations, but for me, this weapon falls lower on the list because I just don't love playing with this weapon when I'm playing by myself, and I will probably be playing the majority of this game solo. Now let's move on to the B tier, and taking the bottom spot in B tier is the Charge Blade. This has an extremely cool ebb and flow when it comes to its different combos, as well as charging up the different parts of the weapon between the blade, the shield, and other things. It can be a little confusing and hard to understand, just like the Switch Axe. There's a lot to know, there's a lot to manage, and a lot of different, I would say, not currencies, but different aspects of the weapon you have to keep charged up at all time, hence Charge Blade. It's extremely good defensively because when you're in sword and shield mode, there's a lot of good defensive options, and then when you have your openings, you can swap to the fully extended Charge Blade mode. This is a hard to master weapon, but if you can take the time, like I said, with the Switch Axe to master it and learn all the ins and outs of it, it can be one of the best weapons in the game. So that would move it up the list dramatically, but because it is hard to master and confusing for a lot of beginners, then I would put this lower on the list at number 11. There is something extremely beautiful in simplicity, and that's why we have at number 10 the Sword and Shield. The first beta for Monster Hunter Wilds was the first time I've ever actually touched the Sword and Shield in any Monster Hunter game. I I don't know why it took me this long to play with it, but it's actually really fun to use. It kind of just scratched an itch that I had to go up against monsters using this paladin-like build where I'm standing with just a small blade and a shield, waiting for them to make their move so that I could either dodge out of the way, block their attacks, and counterattack. It was really quick. It dealt a lot more damage than I thought it was going to. It was really easy to understand and learn. It's fantastic for group play because you can make a bunch of defensive builds or builds that kind of taunt monsters onto you, but it's also great for solo play because, like I said earlier, it can dish out a huge amount of damage and it's very versatile. It doesn't feel like a slog to play. So I had a blast testing this weapon out. It's a lot more fun than I thought it would be. So I think it is well deserved of the middle spot here in the B tier. Coming in at number 9 and taking the very top spot in the B tier is the Greatsword. This would be what I consider the pinnacle weapon for the entire Monster Hunter series. In most of the thumbnails and all sort of promotional materials that they put out, the Greatsword is usually the weapon front and center. That might be because it's the easiest to see in a thumbnail, or it could just be because that's what they consider the penultimate weapon to kill monsters with. I mean, when you think about it, what makes Cloud Strife so cool in Final Fantasy VII? He's just a small dude with a gigantic sword that runs around and defeats everything in front of him. Unfortunately, though, the Greatsword doesn't move anywhere near as fast as Cloud Strife does, and this is probably the slowest weapon in the entire game. But where this weapon is slow, it makes up with massive power. It's got some very basic combos. You essentially charge up your Greatsword, charge it up again, and then unleash one final flipping attack, which does huge amounts of damage. It's very hard to hit due to all the monsters running around like lunatics, but if you manage to land it, you can essentially kill monsters in seconds. Even though this weapon is extremely easy to use and understand, I actually never recommend beginners use this weapon because I think it gives a very bad idea of what the game plays like. Yes, I agree that Monster Hunter plays much more methodic and slow than a lot of action games, but the Greatsword is much slower, and I don't think it gives a very good idea of how fast the game actually is. We are almost halfway through the list, and we are starting to get into the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop, the very best weapons that Monster Hunter Wilds has to offer. So let's start out with the bottom of A tier. Coming in at number 8, that is the light bowgun. This is a truly fantastic weapon, and it is really easy to understand. So for beginners, this is a great weapon to dish out tons of damage. It's super versatile. It has tons of different ammos you can select. Each bowgun has different types of ammos you can add to it. It's got special moves, special attacks. It shoots really fast, so it can act like a light chain gun. And I think it's just a ton of fun to play with. I would not be shocked if after a few weeks of this game being out, this is one of the most popular weapons, maybe in the top 3 used, because it's just so fun to play with. It's really easy to understand. It's really easy to get the hang of, and it gives you a lot of options for every single monster that is thrown your way. If this were Monster Hunter World, this weapon would be nowhere near as low as it is right now, but that doesn't mean this weapon is bad either. Coming in at number 7 is the bow. For my first playthrough of Monster Hunter World, this was my main weapon. I logged probably 300 hours into this weapon. It is so much fun to use, but we are not talking about Monster Hunter World anymore. We are in Monster Hunter Wilds, and the only reason this is so low is because there's so many other weapons I think that are so much more fun and engaging to play. To start off, the bow is extremely easy to understand and use. It's one of the best weapons at hitting all of the airborne targets that are going to be thrown at us in this game. It's going to be one of the best PC weapons in the game because you can just use the keyboard and mouse to aim and line up your shots versus using the controller. I think the bow is also going to be one of the highest DPS weapons in the game due to you being able to hit the monster pretty much wherever it's at all times. Even if the shots don't deal as much damage as you would with a melee weapon, you can constantly be doing damage, and it has also one of the fastest playstyles in the game. It's very agile, it's very mobile, and you can live out your Legolas fantasy with the bow. So if you're looking something that is kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, super fun to play, I would highly recommend the bow. We've got one last spot before we move into the S tier, the absolute best weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds. But we need to name the last one in A tier, and that is coming in at number 6, the Kinsect Glaive. This is a weird weapon. It's a fun weapon. It's one that can be really, really confusing if you do not take the time, sit down, and actually read what the different things do. I mentioned a second ago that the bow was my main weapon for my first playthrough in Monster Hunter World, and after that I switched to the Kinsect Glaive. It took me a while before I actually understood that you could customize your Kinsect. What is a Kinsect, you might ask? It's a weird little bug beetle thing that is attached to your weapon that you can shoot out and pull different affixes from the monster, increasing your damage, increasing different aspects of your weapon. And to fully utilize the Kinsect Glaive, you absolutely need to be shooting this bug out at all times, pulling it back to you, attaching it to the monsters. When you shoot out this little bug, it can also make the monster shoot out these little smoke clouds. I know they're little like moth things, but they look like little smoke clouds. And if you or one of your teammates hits those, they do different effects. Some can cause explosions, others poison effects, some stun, sleep. Customizing your Kinsect Glaive is great to do and needed, honestly. It's probably the most customizable weapon in the game, and I think it's extremely important to make sure that depending on which monsters you're trying to hunt, you are customizing it accordingly. Another thing that this weapon has going for it is a lot of airborne attacks. It's pretty much exclusively dashing through the air, and it is great for mounting monsters. With many other weapons, you have to jump off of various parts of the world in order to mount, but the Kinsect Glaive boosts you in the air and allows you to mount the monster very, very easily. I love this weapon. It's so much fun to use, so I'd highly recommend at some point in your Monster Hunter Wilds playthrough checking out the Kinsect Glaive because it is a lot of fun if you take the time to learn it. Before we get to S tier, just as a reminder, if you heard any sneezes, little coughs, little noises from the tiny week and a half old baby in the background, be sure to put it in the comments. Now, S tier, let's go. Number 5, bottom of S tier, is the hammer. This might be the most user-friendly weapon in the game. It might be the most noob-friendly weapon in the game, while also dealing out probably some of the highest weapon damage that this game has to offer. It's one of the few weapons in the game that allows you to move while charging up attacks. A lot of the other weapons that require you to charge certain aspects of it, you have to be stationary, standing still, and open yourself up to attack. But the hammer allows you to charge up those attacks while moving. It's great. There's so many different great things added to this weapon in Monster Hunter Wilds. It allows you to pull yourself to the monster, dash away from it while charging it up. It's awesome. I would truly, truly recommend this to beginners, but then also experienced players because it gives you the best of both worlds. So the hammer comes in at number 5, rounding out the bottom of the S tier. Go boop boop, doink those monsters on the head. The weapon that I have slotted at number 4, I actually think will move up a spot or 2 in the next couple weeks because of status effects. So, if you haven't guessed it yet, number 4 is the Dual Blades. This is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to dealing any sort of status effect to monsters. It's super fast, it has a great ebb and flow, it's probably the most mobile weapon in the game, it's all surrounding what's called demon mode and archdemon mode, building up this charge bar and then expending it using different combo moves. It's a lot of fun. It's great for dashing around. It's really hard to master though, so I think that's one of the reasons right now why I don't have it higher, and because the status effects that we see added to these weapons later on as we progress further into the game, I think will actually make these weapons way better than they already are. I would not be shocked if by the end of this game the Dual Blades take the number 1 spot. But right now, I cannot rank it higher. So Dual Blades, number 4, they're awesome. Live out your Attack on Titan fantasy and go murk those monsters. Coming in at number 3 is the Heavy Bowgun. This thing hits like an absolute truck. I think this will be in contention for the world records for fastest kills on pretty much every single monster in the game. I believe this weapon is so good for a few different reasons. Like I said earlier, it hits like a truck. It's extremely easy to use. It's extremely easy to understand. It's very noob friendly, but also has a very high skill cap. And once you hit that skill cap, like I said, you'll probably be in contention every single hunt to kill things faster than anything else in the game. It has a lot of different ammunition that you can kind of mix and match to fit your specific situation. It can cut through monsters, it can stun monsters, it can pretty much do anything you want it to. But because it's so heavy, it's a bit slower, but that also means that you have great defense with it. It actually has a block built in that you can utilize whenever you want. It's great. The Heavy Bowgun is going to be a beast, so I think it's very deserving of its spot at number 3. All right, folks, we are now down to the last 2 spots in the weapon tier list for Monster Hunter Wilds, and I think some of you may be surprised, some of you not so shocked, but the number 2 weapon in this list is actually my favorite weapon in the entire franchise. Can anyone go doot doot? The Hunter Horn is the number 2 weapon on this list. I think the Hunter Horn is so much fun to play. They've made some additions to the Hunter Horn in Monster Hunter Wilds that I think make it infinitely better than any other installment before it. First off, I think for me, one of the reasons it's so fun is because of my Scottish heritage. It's basically beating things up with a bagpipe. That's really cool. Secondly, it's incredible for group play. Buffing up your friends and allies is a lot of fun, and everyone always loves when someone with a Hunter Horn joins their party. Has anyone ever been sad when someone with just tons of buffs joins their party? No. Buffs are king. Buffs make you do big damage. Buffs go doot doot. Also, this hits like an absolute unit. It's way faster as well than it used to be. It also has a new mechanic where you basically put a little echo bubble on the ground, and if you stand in it, it mimics and does damage based off of what you're doing. So it kind of adds little bits and damage here and there. So if you're able to stand in this for long periods of time, it will up your damage dramatically. It's my favorite playstyle in Monster Hunter, and I'm really excited to main this in the game. So let's go doot doot, let's buff up, let's get all the monsters. Last but certainly not least is a weapon that I think will be the most popular in all of Monster Hunter Wilds. It pretty much is always the most popular. I don't know why. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better than any other weapon, but on my list, I think there's a bunch of reasons why the longsword takes the number 1 spot at the top of S tier in Monster Hunter Wilds. The longsword is extremely versatile. It has tons of different ways to approach your monsters that you're fighting. It's really fast. It deals tons of damage. You get so many style points from using this weapon. There's very few downsides to using the longsword. So when I look at it objectively, even though it's not my favorite weapon, it's really, really hard to put it anywhere but number 1. Even though I said earlier the greatsword feels like the pinnacle weapon for Monster Hunter as a franchise, the longsword feels like the weapon that the developers just have a love affair with. This thing gets so much attention. Like I said, it's got very few weaknesses. It can do everything you need it to. It can do tons of just raw damage. It can do tons of elemental damage and status damage. It's just a beast. While I'm not taking popularity into account for the tier list here, that doesn't change the fact that I still think it's going to be the most popular weapon in the game, the most used, and I think everyone is going to love using this weapon. So that brings us to the end of the list, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with this? Do you hate this list? Is there anything on here that's controversial? Let me know. I want to know. But my list is scientific, my list is the best, and so there you go. If you found this video helpful or informative in any way, or you just want to get at me for having the best list and you don't like it, be sure to subscribe and keep it locked here for all things Monster Hunter. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.